So first, let's define what is a process. So a process is a systematic series of activities directed towards causing an end result, such as one or more inputs will be acted upon to create one or more outputs. So that's a whole bunch of words. The key things you want to know is activities, inputs, and outputs. So you have an activity, right? That's your process. You have something that's going to help you achieve that activity, and you have an output, which is your result. Okay, and there are 47 of these processes outlined in the PMBOK. So, quick note about the processes is different from the product life cycle. In the product life cycle, you see you have introduction, growth, maturity of the product, and then finally it declines. There's no overlapping phases, it just goes with time. So think of this as something like an iPod, right? So it was very, very popular a couple of years ago, and now it's kind of declining. 47 processes, so that it be properly aligned with each other, integrate with each other. They're all different and distinct, the 47 processes outlined in the PMBOK. They all specialize in one thing, and they're very comprehensive. So not all the projects will use all of these processes. You have to tailor these to your own needs. These 47 processes will fit into the 5 process groups. So what is a process group? So like I said before, it kind of divides you through time, right? And they have a clear dependency upon each other. So we have the initiating here, goes to planning, planning goes back to executing and executing, then it goes to controlling, and then it can go back to planning, right? It can go back to planning if necessary, and then executing. And if you notice something wrong, you monitor and controlling again. It's an iterative cycle, and then finally you have closing. So the arrows represent the flow of the information. So who here works in manufacturing? Nobody? Okay. Well, in manufacturing, there's something called a Deming Cycle, and this would make more sense if you worked in manufacturing, but what I see is that these process groups actually matches with the Deming Cycle: start, plan, do, check, and act, and end. So, okay, that'll make more sense when we go to the quality stage. Okay, so what I want you to see is that the processes overlap with each other. So you have initiating, which overlaps with planning, which overlaps with executing, and then you have I want to see is that it's not distinct. Whereas the product life cycle is very distinct. In the project life cycle, all these processes overlap with each other, and the controlling process spans through the entire project, right? All right, so this is what all the processes look in general from the PMBOK. I divided it into 2 slides because it couldn't fit into one. What I want you to see from this is the interdependencies between all of the different aspects. So all the processes do not happen in silo. You do not have to memorize this sheet, by the way. The key point I want to see is I see all the arrows going into each other. So everything's dependent upon each other. And each phase of a project could be a project by itself. Sorry, that's what I was trying to say. So you might be trying to create a big product, right? Like an iPhone or a laptop or something. And within that big product, there's multiple projects. You can do design first, then you do the actual coding, then you do testing, and then QA, etc. So you have different phases of the project. Okay, so just recap: initiating, planning, executing, monitoring, controlling, and closing. Let's just look at each of these a little bit more. In the initiating phase, this is when you start the project. The project has to be selected. It has to be formally selected. The scope is defined. Financial resources are committed to the project. Stakeholders are defined, and this is when the project manager is selected. The project charter is approved at this point, so you have, as a project manager, you have the formal authority to apply resources to the project, and the business case is written and documented.
But not approved, right? So the business case is written and documented, but it's not approved by senior.
It should be approved.
Well, it should be approved.
Business case is in the charter, so it should be approved. So I know I have the recording down here, so you can't really see, but what I have at the bottom here is a tracker. So if, let me see if there's any way to move this at all. Yeah, unfortunately no. But if you're looking at a slide on your own time, there's actually trackers at the bottom to tell you where you are in the slides. Okay. So the project charter is used for high-level planning. So it gives you the milestone schedule, gives you the initial budget, gives you the high-level work breakdown structure, high-level risk assessment, rough order of magnitude of how much things will cost. So rough order of magnitude could be off by plus minus 50%. So you might estimate maybe $1 million, it might end up being $2 million again. Because you're just getting a high level, everything's very high level right now, but the main thing of the charter is defining why this project is happening and high level what needs to be done to make that happen.
Where's the management plan there?
Next step. That's in planning. This is still initiating.
Quick question: Is PMI okay on projects that don't actually meet that? So projects that are done strictly for political reasons, they're fine with that too. Yeah. So they don't necessarily have a solid business case, but they're done. So.
Yeah. So one of the reasons we talked about before in the start was it could be a legal reason or political reason why the project started. Yeah. So those count as projects as well, but. Usually I find those aren't given as high of a priority. Anyway, planning process group. So this is when you come up with a plan that will achieve the project objectives. Everyone should be involved in the planning phase. So employees, all the stakeholders, the sponsor, and the PM. What it helps you is it helps you establish the scope, refines the objective, and determines the course of action to take. And this is where you make your project management plan. That's the main output of the planning phase. So this plan is an overarching plan of all the subsidiary plans. So under the project management plan, you have the scope management plan, you have the time management plan, you have the HR management plan, communications management plan, etc., etc. So it helps you determine the strategy and tactics you plan to use. The main thing is you cannot skip the stage. Okay, you can't say, I'm short on time, so I'm going to skip planning. You can't do that because more planning equals better execution. And if you skip on this stage, you're going to have a higher chance of failure in your project. Because if you fail to plan, then you plan to fail. However, there's a concept called rolling wave planning. So that means you plan the first, because you might be on a 5-year project, and there's no way you can see 5 years in the future. So you plan your initial bid in a lot of detail, and then on subsequent phases, you start to plan it into more details. You plan your current phase in a high level detail, and then your subsequent phases you plan your initial phase in a lot of details, the subsequent phases in high level detail, and then once you get to phase 2, then you plan that in very specific details, and then so forth. Because you cannot see so far into the future. Just kept on wanting to say the word high for some reason. Executing. This is when you're actually doing the work. So this consists of the processes that will be implemented in your project management plan to satisfy the project's specifications. So it focuses on managing people, following the processes, distributing information, and managing stakeholder expectations. Integrating and performing activities to produce deliverables, and execution results may lead to updates to the plan. So in execution, a lot of times what you realize is that things are not going according to plan, right? So you might find that you you made your plan way too aggressive. It looked nice on paper, you might realize, but when you actually try to implement it, things went wrong, and you had to reallocate resources where the people from higher up above you tell you that you have to shift your priorities from one part of the project to another due to certain reasons that you couldn't foresee before. Therefore, you have to redo your plan. Monitoring and controlling. So this is when you're measuring your performance. So you track, review, and regulate the process. You do change management. This is when if there's a change that's happening in the project, you have to document it here, formally document it, submit it to a change control board who is going to approve the change or not. There's 3 types of change requests. So you have your corrective actions, you have preventative actions, and you have defect repairs. So corrective actions is you're just trying to get it back on track when you realize something is deviating from the main baseline. Preventative actions is you're taking proactive action to prevent something from happening. And defect repair is if you notice that something is wrong, and you want to, it's like the product's already out the door, and you realize that there's something wrong with it, and you have to fix it right away. So this is the most serious one. Obviously, you want to keep all those errors out of the system so that you don't have to do a product defect repair.
Damage control.
Yeah, damage control, right? Because then you have all the negative PR and stuff. So, all right, monitor and control risk. Okay. So you're going to follow the risk management plan. A big part of monitoring and controlling process is risk, right? So your job is to constantly to regulate the risk, updating risk management plan. On past projects I've worked on, we submit a risk plan weekly up to higher management with details of what we think the risk of the future would be, any resolved risk from previous weeks, and any that might come up, and what the response plan would be to those. So, monitor controlling, you have your change request, you have your work performance data, your deliverables going in, and then you have your project initiating to review the charter, and then it might go into executing, which is going to tell you your defects or change request, and lastly, it might go into project closing. So this, what I mean is, the things that's going to go into monitoring and controlling is going to affect the rest of the process groups as well. That's what this diagram is showing. So last process group is closing. So this is when you're going to shut down the project, do all the administrative activities, verify that all the work is done, transfer the work to the buyer of the group, formally sign off. Formal sign-off from the client is needed. This is very important because you don't want someone to come back to you a month later and say, I wasn't happy with that project. But then, if you had a formal documentation that says you signed off on this, then there's a legal piece of proof that's done. So it's very important to get their feedback and get their sign-off during the closing. So those two are probably the most important activities in this. The other thing is document lessons learned, because I know on your PMP application, one of the, when you're describing, one thing I forgot to mention before is when you're describing your experiences, one thing I want to tell people is if you put hours in each of those buckets, like initiating, planning, executing, whatever, you should include like a keyword, a key word from the PMBOK for each of those, if you included those. So one thing for closing, for example, is you can say, I documented lessons learned, as an example, right?